Hello, friends, and welcome. We are online and broadcasting to the universe. If you, hopefully you're all, Henri, that's like the first one to join in. Yeah, so join in on the chat. Tell us where you're from. We got folks from all over the place. I know we got, from me, I'm coming from Port Hope, Ontario, which is just east of Toronto, the thriving mini metropolis out here. And I have with me today, super lucky to have Zach Letherman, the creator of Eleventy. Superstar of the internet.
How's it going? Sitting in my house, currently snowed in Iowa. What's up?
Oh, you got the snows. Nice. The kids would love that.
Yeah, it's a snow day today, so if you hear kids yelling.
Kids yelling, dogs barking. Awesome. We got UK, we got Toronto, brilliant, Portland, Oregon. Oh my God, this is awesome. I actually was on, I did a meetup with Jamstack Nigeria the other day, and 6 people from Toronto showed up. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Like, why do we even have locations anymore, right? We're just online. So we got lots to go through today. We're going to get you started learning about Eleventy, learning about Jamstack, learning about how you can sort of, basically make websites that you can actually use as make some money off them, build them for clients, build them for customers, use them as part of your job. And Zach is going to kind of help us along the way. He's got a lot of great expertise, but definitely, where's Joel's hair bun? Yeah, Joel's hair bun is gone as of maybe 20 years ago. Old guy over here. Definitely ask questions, interrupt. I'll be monitoring the chat as best I can, and we'll do this. It's going to be great. I also have a couple folks monitoring chat from the Agility side of things too. A little bit about myself. My name's Joel. I'm president CTO here at Agility. You can follow me at Joel Varty. I also love musical theater. That's there's Frankenstein. That's Music Man. Man, I miss musical theater. It was a lot of fun. There's Spam-A-Lot. And there's me as a football coach, which I've also missed this year because my son plays football and I like to coach him, but we've had 0 football for the whole year. So no fun. And super excited to have Zach here. You can follow Zach at Zach Leet and not with a K, as we spelt on one of our shares the other day. That was really funny. Zach, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, yeah, I'm Zach Letherman. I created Eleventy. I work for netify, making sort of front-end websites for them. And yeah, I've been a web developer for over 20 some years.
Brilliant. I think it's really cool that you consider yourself a front-end developer, but I would say Eleventy is a very back-endy kind of technology in terms of like where it runs. It runs on a server, whereas front-end is like JavaScript that runs in the browser. Did you find that was a big difference in sort of your, like a big learning curve in terms of like your skills that you need every day to work on this sort of back-end technology?
And that's a good question. I've always sort of been fascinated with optimization and how to make websites better and faster. And Node.js sort of provided an opportunity to reuse a lot of the skills that I've already sort of honed on the front end in terms of using JavaScript for everything. And I really like how Node.js sort of lets me combine my skill sets in that way. So yeah, I definitely do consider myself a front-end developer, even though I do write quite a bit of Node code nowadays.
Yeah, I think it's really awesome. I think that this is a great example of where the Jamstack and that kind of concept has really enabled front-end developers to kind of take over the full stack world with the idea of we can write Node, we can do it in JavaScript, and there are APIs for everything. And the APIs drive the internet now, right? So that's awesome. Thanks for being here, Zach. When I reached out on Twitter, I was so pleased when you said that you'd join us. Now, I don't know where the name Eleventy came from. I know when I first saw Eleventy, I thought of Bilbo Baggins's 111st birthday. First thing that jumped to my mind, and the line, "I don't know half of you half as well as you should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve," which no one really understands, which is pretty fun.
It's definitely in our wheelhouse and our brand for sure.
Yeah. But if there are some pretty cool websites that are built on Eleventy, which is like kind of mind blowing in a way, because it's like one person created it. So web.dev, which is just this little website that has like everything about the internet and developers from it, and built by the Google team. V8.dev, the Developer Chrome Summit, pretty cool. netlify.com, which you might know a little bit about, Zach.
Yeah,
Jamstack.org, which is built by one of your colleagues, and I think you've probably, I'm sure, have had a hand in that one too. And you can see the whole thing on eleventy.dev. So pretty amazing technology. Let's learn about it. Any other sites on here that I missed that you're proud of, or that you think of when you think of Eleventy?
I mean, there's a whole bunch. I think one of the big ones for me was when it was used at a CERN, for a CERN website. I was like kind of blown away by that. But yeah, we have them all. We have a big showcase of highlighted sites on our homepage.
Right. Now, one of the things that we were talking about this earlier, just before we started broadcasting, is you use this for netlify.com. You work for that company, and it is your open source project. So first of all, awesome. Congratulations for the work you do maintaining an open source project, because that's a lot of work. And I'm sure the stress of that is a big deal. And also rewarding as well. But then to use it for your work at Netlify, tell me about that experience.
I mean, it's great. I get to use it on, I think, almost all of our properties. All the sites we've released, I think, microsites and major sites on netlify.com in the last year since I joined have been sort of built with Netlify, or
right.
excuse me, built with Eleventy
right.
on Netlify, obviously. But yeah, it's been great to sort of own the whole stack in that way, because a lot of features that we need for new sites get rolled back into the product. And so in that regard, a lot of reinvestment happens from professional work back into open source projects, and it's just sort of like a big mix.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, let's dig into the technology a little bit more. Okay, so what are we going to learn today? What are we going to go through? So there is a free Eleventy starter from Agility CMS that we're going to go through. So and this is actually on the eleventy.dev site in the starter section. If you search for Agility CMS, we're going to take you through some of that code just to see how it works, how Eleventy does its templating and its data grabbing and all that sort of stuff with the CMS. So the idea is, of course, you could build your site just for your own personal portfolio without ever having any data. But if you want to actually use this for your customers or in your job, you're going to want to pull in data from somewhere. And this is a good example of how to do that and how to do what's called dynamic routing. We're going to show you how to deploy to Netlify and or Vercel, which is, it's like, I don't even need to show this. If you know how to check into basically a Git branch, then you can do this. But we'll go through it. I was specifically showing Netlify here because shout out to Zach. We're going to show how to do preview. It's one of the things that a lot of other frameworks say that they have that, really Eleventy has nothing to do with preview, but you can certainly achieve that really easily. We're going to set up the local development environment. And we're going to talk about performance, which Henri will be really happy to see. So we'll have a few different iterations of the starter that I've been going through that has some bad Lighthouse scores, and then how do we make those a little bit better. Also in this Jamstack 101, just like, again, a little bit more about how Eleventy works. Talk a little bit about Agility CMS content and pages and how that translates into what you're actually doing on there. And talk about how Agility has a concept of layouts and templates and modules, and how that works with with Eleventy layouts. Too many terminologies, man, here. We're going to talk a little bit about Tailwind CSS, Alpine JS, because that's in this project. And Webpack just a little bit. And again, I'm not telling you have to use these things. I honestly, as I was saying to Zach earlier, I used Tailwind CSS in here because I was able to go and grab examples from tailwindui.com, and it was all pre-built, so I didn't have to do the front end work. All right, here we go. So here's a little illustration, by the way, this PowerPoint will be done very soon, of how static site generation works in sort of the Jamstack DevOps world. You don't have a web server. You have a build server. And so when I talk about, where my code is running, and then on the code that Zach wrote that basically runs Eleventy in Node, that runs on your build server. Okay, Eleventy does not run in the in your browser, right? So it's going to take your code, it's going to take your content and all your data, combine that in your build server, and output your static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I think Eleventy is probably the best example of how to do that. And Zach, I remember we were talking at a meetup, the Toronto meetup, not too long ago, and there was a guy talking about running Eleventy on a Raspberry Pi taking JSON files from an MRI machine or some kind of imaging machine and outputting like PDFs and sending emails. That was really cool. And I remember seeing your face and you were like, what? That's a pretty cool like example of it's not building a website, right? Like tell me how that felt when you heard about that.
Man, yeah, that presentation was incredible. Just the medical applications of using Eleventy, just the idea of that just sort of blew my mind. And yeah, I don't remember too many specifics about it, but I remember being just blown away that Eleventy was being used in the medical profession.
Yeah, so I think it's really good to think of Eleventy in this case as like kind of like a tool that you can use in your toolkit to help you do your job as a web developer and as a front-end developer to really supercharge your capabilities. So that's awesome. Again, follow us along, a bunch of like ways to follow there. And I think Olga has been popping up some other stuff. You can also join the Agility CMS Slack to talk about us, or to sort of talk about sort of Jamstack and other stuff in there. So agilitycms.com/join Slack. And then coming up as well, we have other events. So agilitycms.com/events that'll be happening. Yeah, lots of things coming through. So I don't think there's much to do. Let's get into some code and actually do some stuff. Yay. All right, let's kill this screen and all right. Hopefully the screen will come back soon. Please come back. Okay, here we go. All right. Hey, look, code. So I have a few different things I'd like to show. We have this project that we talked about, and I think someone actually in the chat there actually put this up on there. So if you go to github.com/agility, there is an Eleventy repository, Eleventy Starter 2020. This is the repo we're going to be using. And there's a couple different branches on here, but the main branch is the one you're going to want to use. And the README talks you through all the things you need to do to sort of clone this, do an npm install, sign up with Agility, get your API keys and that sort of stuff. I'm going to assume that you're all going to be able to do that. So we're not going to walk through that side of it. I actually did a tutorial last sort of fall that went through this, actually going through it with you. But I want to just actually jump a little bit into the idea of we're going to take, I mean, this is the sort of the reason for being for something like Eleventy. It's like, where's our data? Where's our templates? And how do those get merged together? All right. So when you actually create that Agility account, you're going to get this. And it has, let's actually start here. You're going to get to basically here. And it has this little sitemap. So Agility gives you a sitemap object with your data that has all of the different pages on it. Each one of those pages has a template. So remember that. And each page, so if you see here on the settings, it's like this is the main template that this page is using. And they all have modules on there. And each module has some data. Okay, so these are, and it has some fields. And just like any headless CMS, basically this piece of content has a schema that is set up on it with fields. So you can assume that all that data is there, and I don't want to spend too much time in the CMS, but we also have our main content section over here because this is first and foremost a blog. You can see we've got our authors and our categories and a list of posts. These are the blog posts. And this, I think that we have 3 blog posts actually in here. So you assume that this, I mean, in most headless CMSs, this is what you would normally get. Agility also gives you the idea of pages, all right? So let's take a look at the first try that I did at Eleventy. I'm actually going to back up to basic no webpack, a different branch here. I'm going to run an npm install. So this is not what you will get if you clone the repo right now because I put some fixes in here because the Lighthouse scores weren't so great. All right. So this is the base project that it has here. And again, there's the standard stuff. The npm, if this is your first time using npm, there's a package.json that has all the different, basically the things that are included, which is not very much, right? So I'm using Eleventy, and I love that the version is 0.11. Makes sense. Is it ever going to be like, what are you going to do when it's the next version?
We're working towards 1.0.
All right, we're going to write to 1.0. Okay.
There won't be a 12.
There won't be a 12. Wouldn't make any sense. We're going to use the Agility. Agility basically uses content sync. So this has actually worked really well. The idea is like, we're not going to pull all our content down every time. We're actually going to pull down just the delta that we need for this guy. All right. And then I have a bunch of stuff in here. And this is something that I hadn't used before, but it uses a command called npm run all, which is really, really useful. It means that I can chain a bunch of commands together without having to dump too much stuff around. So for Eleventy, it works perfectly. You can think of Eleventy as like, it's a command that's going to run, and as Zach was telling me earlier, it basically runs in the folder that you're in, right? It just does the thing that you tell it. And so you can see I've got these Eleventy commands. So when I run npm run dev, the first thing it's going to do is actually synchronize. It's going to run this Agility sync for me, pull down all the content that I need, and put it in data files that I'm going to use. Then it basically runs Eleventy, right? And I can use npm run dev, which builds the site in preview mode. I can do npm run build, which will build the site in production mode. And then I can do npm run start, which starts off an actual web server that I can use. And when you're doing local development, that's most often what you're going to do. So you can do npm run start or just npm start. See here, let's just scroll back. So let's back up here. So what it did, you can see, it ran and it did the CMS stuff first. So Agility pulled down any content that it needed for this thing. It started up Eleventy, which did a bunch of stuff and wrote all these files. And then there's a watcher that watches my files as I change them. And then that's going to actually update in my browser. So if I switch to my browser here, I think I've got this running on port 8080, and here we go. So it's all running. So if you can, when you're working through the README in the GitHub tutorial, if you can get this far, then you're doing great. Pretty straightforward. Let's talk about how this code actually works. And Zach may have a few things to say about how I coded this. Hopefully they're all good. So the first thing that we talked about, so everything by default is in the _ data folder for Eleventy. So this is where we actually going to go and get our data, all right? I'm not going to dig too much into here, but you can see our list of posts are right here. And I don't know, pretty much everybody's using async stuff. And I think that's one of the things I like, Zach, about Eleventy is it doesn't make me decide when I'm going to do my async stuff. And it just makes async super easy, right? As long as it returns a promise, I'm okay.
Yeah, I mean, there are some limitations with specific template languages around what can be async and what can't be, but inside the data folder, yeah, everything can be async or not async, and we handle it for you.
Yeah. So in general, what I've done here is I've created 4 different sort of data repository objects. You can kind of think of them as these are going to be objects that I can use later, and as long as they return a promise that eventually resolves, then you're okay. So here I'm using the Agility sync SDK, and it basically says, hey, get me my sync client, get me a content list called posts in a current language. So I've set the language code, and then I'm going to map that to the thing and actually truncate my excerpt here, just do some processing on it, and I'll return that. We also have a few other things in here, like the Agility gives us that sitemap object. So you can see I'm calling get sitemap and looping through all the pages in there. So you can kind of think of this, we have 2 lists here. One is the list of all the pages in my site. So sometimes with Eleventy, you'll have like actual pages that are hard-coded into your thing. But a lot of times a blog will have a list of posts that each one of those posts represent a page. So we have both of those concepts here. And then we have global stuff for a couple other things where I have my header and footer, which is also defined in the CMS. And that's really common in a CMS to have like everything above and everything in your footer defined in there. So you're editing it and not your customers. All right. So, and this is the trick. And this is the hardest thing I had in terms of a concept with Eleventy is like, well, how do I get that data into a template? It kind of feels like magic. And I think of everything as starting with index. I think that's an easy place to start. It's like the default place where everything goes. So there's this idea of pagination. So Zach, what the heck is pagination?
Pagination is basically a shortcut to create multiple output pages from a single input template. So you have your index.njk there. That will create one or more output templates in your output directory.
Now, and I don't have to use, so NJK do you say a Nunjux? It's a templating engine called Nunjux. There's my first try was with something called Liquid. There's also just basic templating. What's the most popular one?
I mean, I would say Nunjux is very popular. Liquid is also very popular just because we get a lot of folks that come over from Jekyll land and they're familiar with that.
Right.
I think Liquid is a little bit better maintained. If I had to make an opinion about that, just because Nunjux is kind of in maintenance mode right now. So Liquid is actually a little bit faster too. So take that for what you will.
Okay. Well, cool. All right. So in this case, I'm using my Agility pages data, which comes from here. So notice it's called the same thing. So like this is the same file name. It's called Agility pages. And I alias so each is basically going to create a for loop. You can think of it that way. And I alias each one of those called Agility page. So that's important because I now have an Agility page object I can use, and I'm going to change my permalink. And this is where you've added the ability for basically dynamic routing, right? To say, hey, this is where we're going to put the output file for this thing. So there's this, and this is just in the object that I have. So however I set up my objects, this is good. And then we're going to use this page layout.njk to do all the work. So let's go look at that guy, because that's the majority of where everything's going to happen in this main sort of template. So this is where I have my actual HTML thing here. And, you know, I have to say, coming from like the React world where I had to use like something called Helmet to get my head tag, and it was just like, what? I had to learn all these concepts because React a couple years ago was brand new to me. So this is much more familiar to me because I feel that I'm more comfortable with HTML, and I really like this. And I just saw a comment that's like vanilla.js or bust, which I really like in terms of coding on the back end, because it's simple. I know what's going to happen. It's not going to render a component. And we were talking earlier about how like the front end framework that you most often use is Vue, right?
Yeah, I mean, I use a couple of them, but in terms of netify.com is using Vue components in Eleventy. So
on top of Eleventy, yeah. So does that actually get weird though? Like in terms of like, well, hey, where's my code running? I feel that when I'm running like Nuxt, which is like a static site generator on top of Vue, I end up writing this Vue code that runs sometimes in the server, sometimes in the browser. I'm not really sure where all the time. I pretty much know with Eleventy, this is all running on my build server. But then if you add Vue on there, how do you kind of separate it?
Yeah, so in Eleventy specifically, the Eleventy Vue plugin is strictly build generated code. So there is no client-side view. I mean, we don't manage any client-side view code for you. Now you can obviously do client-side rendered view, but you'd have to manage that separately. Basically, the thing we were going for with the Eleventy Vue sort of architecture for netify.com specifically is that we wanted our deliverable to be HTML only. We didn't want any client-side JavaScript dependencies injected by the framework. And so we use Vue components to generate HTML. And there is no client-side JavaScript in the output, which is sort of like, Eleventy's wheelhouse.
Yeah. Okay. So just walk through this here, Rick. With me, I've got my global object, which I had set up here. So I've got that global header object that I talked about earlier, and it has like the site name and a couple of the things. I've got my page title that I output into my header. So this is all pretty straightforward. Just like this, when I talk about templating, this is what I think of. So we've got, this is a nunjux template, and this is a nunjux block in a way. Okay. So this makes sense here. And we have this SEO object, and we do the open graph image. So if we have an open graph image from like a blog post, we're going to output that. Pretty straightforward. And this is a simple condition. Down here, we get to some bad choices. Henri is not going to like this. So here, what I did is, because I'm super lazy, I just wanted to use my Tailwind code that I copied from Tailwind UI's free components, which are beautiful if you're like me and not really a front end guy at all, front end person. So I did this. This is like 3 meg of CSS, but it works, right? And then I have my inter font, and then we're also using in this guy Alpine.js. So this is the Alpine, hey, the whole thing. So this is nice because it works, and it works out of the box super easy. But yes, already drops in this chair. Yeah, so we'll fix this in a second. Let's go through how this all works first. By the way, this file the header is the most complicated part. The rest is all in here. So what we do, this is what I love about Nunjux, is I can do dynamic includes. Does Liquid have dynamic includes?
It does, yep.
It does, okay. I couldn't get to work, so I'll do another example of that someday. But it's really nice because Agility page has, like, remember that main template that I showed back here? I'll just jump back real quick. This page was using, where was it? It had main template in the settings. So what I do is I just load a file called main template.njk right over here. super simple. And we have other sort of normal includes for our header and our footer that we output here. So because these includes can be strings, it's super easy. Now you could also use what's called an Eleventy shortcode for these things, and I'll show some shortcodes later as we go through these things. What was the impetus between creating shortcodes in Eleventy as opposed to just doing everything through templating?
I mean, shortcode is just basically some sugar for different templating language features. So it's something they exposed to us, and we just sort of wrapped it to make it a little bit, I guess, easier to use, because a lot of those hooks are very, I don't know, the code behind them is a little bit gnarly for, I would say, for something I would even want to implement.
So yeah, so we could end up having a shortcode that looks kind of like that, right? Like template, and maybe I pass it this as a parameter, something like that.
Yeah, you'd need the percentages there, but yeah.
Oh, right, that's right. I'm just a noob. Okay, so in theory, I could do something like that, which could then do some logic to see maybe if the template doesn't exist, it could do some other stuff to figure out if it does. So which I kind of like, because I don't like to have too much logic in a template. I think that's a really, really good idea there. Oh, Meg, I totally am a noob. I'm learning things all the time. I feel like, especially when I got someone like Zach right here, I can ask the questions. It's awesome.
We're all noobs about different things.
That's right. Learning all the time. So, okay, so this is going to render the main template. Let's have a look at that main template. It doesn't do much. It has this main class that does a whole bunch of, by the way, if you haven't seen Tailwind before, that's what Tailwind looks like. First time I ever saw it, I thought I was going to just like, bleh. It just looks horrible. I said, why do I have to learn a whole new version of CSS? This is even harder than the original. But once you do start thinking of the utilities that are useful in here, and actually I find is very useful. And what I was talking about with Zach earlier, we had a really good conversation earlier. He was telling me, sorry, maybe you should tell us, Zach, how would you use something like Tailwind if it had what you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, the last time I tried Tailwind, it was sort of like more of an all or nothing thing. And I sort of mentioned to you earlier that I wish it was bundled more in the way that Lodash is on NPM. So you can just sort of import any specific piece of Lodash that you want to use, and you don't have to buy into the thing wholesale. And I kind of wish that Tailwind was the same way, because I would get a ton of use out of sort of the spacing and margin utility classes that come from Tailwind, but I might not want it to do like gradients, which I'd rather just write the CSS for myself.
Yeah, the ability so this is a good thing to note. If you're thinking about building a framework, the ability to allow incremental adoption in that framework, it really helps. And I know that's one of the things with both Vue and React when they first came out. It's like, you don't have to rebuild your whole front end. You can use a sprinkling of Vue or React in here and just add it in. Tailwind would be good to do that. And maybe I'll reach out to the Tailwind folks and see about that, see if there's a way to do that. That's a good thing to follow up on. At any rate, what this thing's going to do is just going to basically create a zone name and pass and do another template. Now, what's interesting here is there's kind of like these global variables, right? That we have that came back from our index. So we've got this thing called Agility page. Then do we think of that as like a global variables act that's just available wherever we need it?
Yes, in this specific template. Yep.
Okay, cool. So we're going to use our render modules template, and this has probably too much logic in it for a template, but it's working for me. So we have our for loop, and we're going to loop through all these zones and modules. And if the zone is the name of the zone that I passed in, so I had a zone name here. This is kind of gobbledygook, but it works. We're going to loop through these modules that are in the zone. I feel like I'm in the zone right now. At any rate, we're going to go through here. I'm going to ignore any missing templates if I forgot to create a module. And so I'm going to look for the modules folder and the module.lowercase. Let's back up a second. So back to my page for a second here. So we have these two modules that are on my homepage. One's called the rich text area. Let's look at that first. Okay, it's like hello WordPress. It's like the big old editor here. And this basically is in a module called rich text area, which is just like a kind of content. So what happens is I created a module or a template in the modules folder called rich text area.njk. So when that gets encountered in my data, I just look for it in there. Okay, so that's as long as I know what my JSON looks like, then I can find what's happening in here. what's going on. So it comes through and it's going to render the module if it exists. I probably should have something that outputs, by the way, if someone uses a module that I didn't create a template for yet, to have something there, but I didn't do that yet. So anyway, we're going to render. So let's look at our rich text area. It's a pretty simple one, and it uses what's called the Tailwind Pros, which is pretty nice. And we just output the text blob field. Super simple. It's like the most basic thing ever. So when we actually run this, this is that piece of output. So it outputs pretty nicely, and it does some nice job. So in terms of like just getting raw HTML out there, we can do that, which isn't too special. But how do we actually template something that's a little more complex? Wait, why do you have module.module on line 7? Well, let's check it. Module.module. Well, this is the bad variable naming. Probably should have been something like module obj, and the other one should have been module name, maybe. But so this is like the module. It also has all the data attached to it, and this is like the name of the module. Variables I'm not great with variables. Okay, so there's this other module that does a little bit more. Oh yeah, I just broke everything. I'll turn it back. There we go. Love hot reloading, by the way. So if you thought you only got hot reloading with React, you're wrong. You get it with Eleventy too, and it's so great. Let's check the hero background as image, which is the worst name ever, but there are so many variants of the hero module that I thought let's do this. I was going to create more of them, but I didn't. So hero background as image. All right. So I've got this one. We just create. By the way, once you get started, you really only end up working with these templates. Once you have your data, you spend a lot of time working in templates. Is that true for your job too, in terms of working on something like netify.com? You spend most of your time in those templates?
Yeah, we have templates, like full page templates that are view components, and then individual reusable components. And
right.
Yeah, the view model, we get a lot of sort of mileage out of reusing different lower level view components. So it's been great.
Now, you're a front end developer. Are you a designer too, or do you leave that to somebody else?
Yeah, I'm definitely not a designer. I have actually a computer engineering degree, so I think that degree by design is about as far away from designer as you can be. But just my entire career, I'm sort of an engineer that wishes they were a better designer. So I definitely have a huge respect for UX people and designers in general. And I think there's a huge value in that specific job. So yeah, I just wish I was better at it. I'm trying to get better at it every day.
Yeah, I hear you on that one. I am far from designing myself. So one of the things that we get asked a lot, we're a CMS company. CMS just delivers you content, right? We have nothing to do with design, but we often get a lot of, how do I share design resources across projects? And in Jamstack projects, a lot of people use like NPM or different ways of sharing their JavaScript code around. How do people tend to share? Like, do you have a design system that you share? What's the way that people do that with Eleventy?
I mean, we have view components that could be used in other projects across netify.com, but really the most mileage we've sort of gotten out of reusable front-end components have been web components specifically, just because they can be dropped into any tech stack. And so if you've followed me on Twitter, I've been publishing a few of the sort of web components that we've used on netify.com and things that I want to use in some other projects that I have. And so, yeah, I've been getting a lot of mileage out of web components in that regard.
Oh, brilliant. So yeah, you've been creating web components that are kind of like reusable pieces of front-end technology in a way. And to me, that's kind of like the Lego blocks of the web. And what I like about that is from this standpoint, if you're in the CMS, you can create modules, which are like your Lego blocks for your individual website that you can use. So those could end up basically just outputting your web components that you could share across projects. So that's great. So as a developer, you can kind of build up this library of your work that you can reuse over and over again to be more efficient and to spend less time doing the same thing over and over again. Okay, let's take a look at this hero template a little bit from there. Awful lot of tailwind code in here, not much content, but we are seeing, like, there's our title. There's our little announcement field, the subtitle field. These fields are just coming through. It's straight text. Here's our primary call to action. Here's the text, the href, and the target for that thing. Probably should have a no refer thing on there, but I don't. So that's a fix that should happen at some point. Coming through here, coming down. Oh, Henri's going to like this. Not too bad with a picture tag. So this is where we could probably use something like Eleventy's image plugin, right?
Yeah, Eleventy image has a little utility that helps you generate the HTML for your image or picture, and it sort of auto decides which one you need based on your widths and your formats that you want to output.
Yeah, and in general, like, so Eleventy by its nature does not, so you have, by the way, you have like the Eleventy like leaderboard, right? Of all the that you run with the speed, is it Speedlify that you run? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I wanted the sort of the showcase of Eleventy sites to have a little bit more to it than just like straight links. So yeah, we use a plugin that I wrote called Performance Leaderboard, which just basically wraps Lighthouse. And sort of it will run Lighthouse a bunch of times and sort of select the median run from those. And then it ranks the sites in order of Lighthouse scores. And there's some other tiebreakers that are built into it. But so every site that's built with Eleventy and you want to be featured on our sort of Eleventy showcase on eleventy.dev is run through this leaderboard. Yeah, and they're sort of ranked in order, so you can track the performance of your site over time, and we'll do that. We'll sort of run those analytics for you.
That's awesome. And you also built the other day, I saw you had on Twitter a thing that like based on the leaderboards, it would light up something. You had some lights that go on. Was that based on like when it was finished running on any site, or is just your particular site that it would light up if you got, high scores? How does that work?
Yeah, so I have, this is a ridiculous project, but I actually have like 4 smart bulbs back here. And I don't know why. This is probably like $100 project. I don't know why I did it. But anyway, I got 4 smart bulbs here, and each one of them is hooked up to a Node script that I can run. Here, I can maybe just do it like right now, and you might be able to see it. Let me run it and see if it'll turn on in the background.
There they are. I think I saw them go on.
No, not yet. Wait. It's running Lighthouse right now. It's going to a site that shall not be named. Oh, there. Okay.
Yeah, cool.
You probably can't tell the difference, but there's an orange and 3 greens. Yeah, and so every time it runs through an entry to performance test it using Performance Leaderboard, it will light up the results back here.
That's awesome. I love that. That's a happy fun project. Love it a lot. Unless they're all red, in which case it's like no. Well, coming back to our story about performance, just running your site on Eleventy doesn't guarantee that you're going to have hundreds across all of those Lighthouse scores. We all would love to have that. I think it's easier to get to that with something like Eleventy because it's all vanilla in terms of like JavaScript. It's not vanilla. It doesn't have a framework that comes out on the front end that has a bunch of overhead that you didn't necessarily put there. So tools like Gatsby, Next.js, they're going to rehydrate your site as a React app in the front end, which is awesome from one point of view. Like you get all of that front end goodness. So I actually love that. And a lot of people love working with that. I don't love what it does to Lighthouse scores by default. If you have a whole bunch of, if you have packages coming out the yin yang, then you could have a really bad Lighthouse score or just nasty things that happen because of that huge JavaScript bundles, things like that. So being familiar with, some performance stuff with HTML in general is really useful, and knowing this picture tag is really great. So there's a lot of, and I've seen this as more of like, I know Gatsby and Next.js both have image plugins. It's really cool to see that Eleventy has that because it takes away a lot of that sort of tough love learning, I call it, where it's like, man, if you just knew more of these things, you'd probably be a better developer, but who's got time to learn all the ins and outs of it? It's really tricky. So obviously our man Zach did a lot of that work for us, and that's pretty great. But it's also important to kind of know this stuff too, which is why Henri, who's I think who's following along here, he's been doing a lot of work with performance, and I know that he talks about this kind of stuff in different image formats all over the place. You can see here, let's just look at what I did real quick in this one, which was super basic. I'm using the picture tag. You always have an image tag that's here by default, and again, this huge tailwind class that's on there. My source for this thing is the smallest version of the image that I'm going to do. Okay, so here's my background images URL for this thing, and I'm going to set the quality to 60 and the width is 500. This is Agility CMS specific stuff, very similar to like WordPress, or if you're used to Cloudinary, it has a different format for its own stuff. So this says, hey, our smallest version of this is going to be 500 width, which actually isn't that small, might be a little too big, and quality 60 for a JPEG. All right, a lot of folks will change that to be even like a progressive JPEG that's really small and fuzzy or whatever. But then we're going to have two more versions of this thing. One is going to be an 800 width image, again, quality 60, when the min width of the browser is 1,000 pixels. And then another one when we get to 1,400 pixels, where we go to 1,200 pixels wide for that image. So this is probably not the best, not hyper optimized. This is certainly something we could look at, or maybe I could just flip to like Eleventy image and it'll just do the work for me if I pass in some stuff. But correct me if I'm wrong, none of the Eleventy image plugin, like we can program it a little bit to pass in a bunch of different sort of breakpoints, right?
Yeah, you sort of tell Eleventy image what widths you want to be output, and then sort of what file formats you want it to generate for you, and then it will create the markup optionally if you want the markup from that.
Right.
I will say that I in a prior job, I used to work at Filament Group, and I built this utility called Imaging Heap, which will go to a site and sort of measure the performance effectiveness of the images that you have in play. And compare the density of each like image resolution that is loaded on a site, and sort of show you how well performing your images are doing. So
that's
I don't
awesome.
know if we can link that up at some point, but yeah.
That's cool. So definitely this is one of the places where, once you get your whole site working, this is a place where you might end up doing some tinkering. Depending on what kind of browsers you want to support, what kind of quality images you have. When you're working with a CMS, you don't have a whole lot of control over what the person uploads in terms of quality of the image that they upload. So if they upload a crappy JPEG that's already been run through a bunch of stuff, so it may end up looking crappy. So in general, I think you want a decent quality. Play on Imaging Heap the musician. I love the chat. In general, you want to have a decent quality image that gets uploaded into the CMS. So if we just check this one, I actually got this image off Unsplash, and it's a pretty decent size image. And it's actually, when the CMS is giving me a warning here, this is like over 300K. You might not want to do this. This is a 1 megabyte image, probably a decent size to have as a source image. It's not crazy huge, but it's going to get then rejigged either by a cloud utility like, well, Agility CDN does it, or it's going to get downloaded and changed around with the image plugin. We'll get to that in a sec. Okay, so once you get all this working and you do some, you just make sure it all works, we can actually test this whole thing by going npm run dev. Run dev. So the way I have this hooked up, I won't take you too much through there, but what I've done is, I remember back here, we have this dev runs in development mode. So it does the agility sync of all the content in development mode, which is like preview mode. So I have all those files for that get built to my, I think they go into the _, maybe the dist folder, pages folder. They go into the dist folder. And you can see this is my whole site. So if you're wondering how Eleventy actually outputs its content, it here is like, there's no question about how it does what it does. It basically does a folder for each page and then an index.html. Can you tweak that to make it to do like, as opposed to, an about folder with index, can I do about.html? I think there is a way to tweak that, right?
Yeah, you can do anything you want with permalink, that permalink entry there. But if you want to manage that sort of globally, there's a little bit trickier thing you got to do. You can create a permalink global data file that will process all of your templates.
I've noticed that when I've moved from, I come from the ASP.NET land, and before that it was Java and a bunch of other stuff, Java server pages and other things. Coming from that sort of mentality into the static website, seeing like folders and files. The first time some developers see it, it's like, oh, horrible. It's like an index.html. It's like, why is everything named index? So that might, but don't be afraid of that. It's okay. And tools like Netlify do a really good job of handling this output. So it's like literally you could drag and drop the output of this dist folder into Netlify and it would work just fine. But what we'd like to do is actually set it up for you so that you can actually deploy this from Git. So I have this linked to a Git repository. It's actually the main Git repository that's in here. And what I've done is gone to, so obviously we're going to clone the repo, upload it into your own repo. You can also fork this repo if you wanted to, however you want. I'm not going to teach you how to use Git today because I suck at Git. I'm not that great. I barely get a pull request together sometimes. But anyway, you get it into the main branch in Git. And if you don't like the name of the default branch that you have, there are ways to change that default branch to whatever you want it to be. I like the word main. And so what I've done is actually created in Netlify, created my site based on Git. So what I did, actually, I can walk you through how that happens right here. So literally, there's a button, create your Netlify account, it's free. Same thing with Vercel. Go new site from Git, and then you pick your GitHub site. It's super, super simple, okay? Walking you through, it's already authorized, and then I go find my repo. This is what happens of configure. So I don't have it configured. So you gotta go configure it. Hopefully this doesn't break everything. I have access to a whole bunch of stuff. If I had my own repo somewhere in here, I would access. I hope I'm not breaking things. Oh, geez. Oh, here's all of the things that I have on here, which I don't think my Eleventy one's actually in my own personal one. I think it's in the Agility one. Let's find that now. Here we go, Eleventy starter. There we go. So find your repo. Hopefully it's not that hard to find. And you basically tell it what to do, right? It's going to run npm run build. If this doesn't look familiar to you, it should, because this is what we ran down here. This is coming from the package JSON, right? Your npm, so like we've got this dev start, this build thing. So this represents npm run build, all right? And then we can choose what our published directory is. So this is the default for Eleventy. So Netlify was smart enough to say, it looks like an Eleventy site. This is what it's going to do. But we can actually change it. In this case, it's using dist. Okay, so it's going to go there, and there's some advanced stuff. We can click deploy. I'm not sure what the advanced does. Oh, environment variables, advanced build settings. So this is important too. So definitely click that old advanced button, and then you can set up your environment variables, because we don't check our environment variables into Git, okay? So I have my .m folder. In the README, it actually tells you how to do all of this stuff, where to put all these different environment variables, but pretty much every API that you're gonna call has to be authorized somehow. So if you're calling into your CMS, you're gonna have some CMS stuff that is set up. And in this case, we're all set up for multilingual. If we wanted to do a multilingual site and just do one language of that multilingual site, we could do that here. So environment variables tend to be settings, but they also can be like keys and stuff. So these are the two keys that I have for this one. And what I would be doing is just copying and pasting as fast as I possibly could to get these into there, because I want to see what it's going to look like. Let's get out of the creation because I've already got my site. I'm going to go back. So what I did is I actually created this site twice. I created it with preview. So what I did on this guy is I set, you know what, let's go set our environment variables. And this is, by the way, we're going through, is this your work right now, Zach? Am I looking at like your actual work here?
No, I do netlify.com, and this is app.netlify.com, which is
so this is not quite the same thing. I still love it though. I have to say, Netlify is one of the reasons why I got excited about Jamstack to start with, because it was so doggone easy. I had a harder time getting my code into Git than I did getting it actually deployed with Netlify. So if you haven't gotten started with something like Netlify, Vercel, I would say, is right up there with the same kind of thing. They have free offerings that are amazing. AgilityCMS.com runs on Netlify right now, and we pay very, very little for it in terms of what it used to be. So we used to run our site on ASP.NET running in Azure, and we paid a lot for it to run on there. And we get a lot more traffic now than we did before because it's way faster. So this is all good stuff. I'm trying to find where my environment variables are because I forget where they are. It's probably down in here somewhere.
I think it's in the build and deploy section.
Build and deploy site. Oh, deploys?
No, back where you
deploy
were.
site.
That was right.
deploy settings. Is that it? No, I was here. Environment. This is where your environment variables are going to be. That makes sense. Let's just do some reading and it'll be okay. So you can see here, I've basically set this to be, set my preview stuff. Oh, what I did is I set the deploy command, wherever that would be. I think I set it to be npm run dev. Here it is, npm run dev. So it's basically going to run it in development mode, which is cool. Super simple, right? That way I can actually have customers previewing what they're doing. And then in my other site that it doesn't have word preview in here, it just runs npm run build. Site details, deploy settings, npm run build. Okay, and it's coming through the dist folder. All right, super, super simple. And what that does is allows me in my CMS or whatever to set up things like preview. So someone clicks preview from the page now, they can actually see the preview version of what they were doing. Now, there's a little bit of a delay because it has to do a build, right? So what we've done is, and almost every CMS has this, Headless CMS, it has what's called a webhook. So in the settings for Agility, you have the ability to go in here and say, hey, what's the webhook set up? So I have a webhook in here set up for save, one for save and one for publish. And what I do is I deployed the site on Vercel as well. So on my save webhook, which is right here, I pasted in basically the address that Netlify gave me for deploying this site. So in there, this is going to be even harder to find, but I'm sure I'll find it. Here it is, the build hook, right? So this Netlify gives you these what's called build hooks so that you can, when your content changes, it can do a build. And that build is going to trigger Eleventy. The same thing that I did. It's going to trigger an npm run build. And what's really cool is it caches stuff. So it doesn't have to do an npm install every time and whatever. So these builds only take a few seconds. How many pages could an Eleventy site have, Zach?
I mean, that's a good question. It can get pretty high. For example, I have a Twitter archive on my personal website that I've built, and I think there's something like, there's a page on that site for every single tweet that I posted. So I think it's like 30-some thousand pages. But yeah, that's a sort of one of the larger sites that we've dealt with.
Right. So it's interesting. A lot of the times we think of the static site generator itself as the bottleneck, and certainly there's a lot of work being done, to do the generation. But Eleventy is great because it's not doing a lot of like black box type stuff. All of the things that are going to be that are slow in there, it's because of your data is slow. So if you're accessing your data and you're like that API that you're calling to pull stuff down, if that pipe is slow, it will be slow. Or if you're doing too much work, which is one of the reasons why I built this site using sync. So Agility syncs down the content and actually syncs it into local files. And I'm really tricky about doing that because I put them in the node modules folder, so they'll get cached. Although I think I could use the .cache folder, but so if you look at content sync, we have our cache here. I have a cache for the live and preview. So that stays around as long as I don't delete node modules, which does happen every once in a while, but then, hey, it gets pulled down and that's okay. So we don't have to get our content every time. And you'll notice that what I've started seeing is folks that are using things like e-commerce APIs to go and pull in, say I'm hooked up to like BigCommerce or Shopify, something like that. I'm pulling it and using a GraphQL API. GraphQL is amazing. And that's great because I'm not going to pull down data that I don't want, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be really fast. If I have 10,000 products in my Shopify catalog, well, that's going to take a little while. So a lot of folks are doing something like caching it to local files and trying to see, hey, what's changed? Or they're using something like Redis cache. So they're actually pulling it to an intermediary spot first. That has nothing to do with Eleventy. That has everything to do with how you're going to use APIs. And I would say for you guys as developers, talking about performance in terms of build performance, Eleventy can build a lot of pages really, really fast if the data is there. So Meg, it sounds like a lot of work. So that's why I would say don't do that work until you have the problem. And when you have the problem, you'll probably have a big enough site that will require it. And I'm speaking from experience. One of the things I hate the most about computer science is caching and clearing out cache and stuff like that. And Zach having written the Eleventy image thing, I noticed there's some caching that's in there too. Okay, so we have it all running. We have it in preview mode. We have it in published mode. We have hooks set up. We have it on netify, and that's awesome. And like, I think there was some comments in there about banging your head against the wall with Azure. Azure is coming out with, or actually already has, Azure Static Web Apps. Have we tried Eleventy on Azure Static Web Apps? Is that a thing?
That's a good question. I don't know.
It should work. I'm going to try it. It's still in preview, so it's free if you want to try it. It's a lot easier. You basically point it at your GitHub repo and do some YAML file with a GitHub action, so the Azure thing doesn't build your site. They're actually using GitHub actions to build your site. So GitHub pages you can actually use as well, and you can build your site using a GitHub action. So there's no reason why Eleventy wouldn't run in there. I think it's probably fine. And then it just pushes that to Azure and sets it all up for you in there. So there are a lot of other opportunities Eleventy can run anywhere that Node can run, pretty much. And I'm actually running locally. I have
Raspberry
Node 15.
Pi.
And it can run. That was a great example of that. I just love that idea. So that's cool. Okay, we've got it all running. I want to talk a little bit about performance, because the performance I know of Alpine, and Tailwind, if you pull in that entire thing, is bad. So let's look at how. And this is what I'm actually showing. I'm not actually showing you the main branch just yet. So I'm going to show you that. Switch to the main branch. Oh, geez. Do I care about any of this stuff? I don't. All right, so let's switch to the main branch. Don't judge, I'm not good at Git. All right, here we go. I'm going to run npm install because I know that there's some different stuff in here. The main branch has Webpack in it, which the first example that I showed did not have that. So Webpack is basically something that makes everything complicated and hard to understand. That's how I think about it, but it makes it a lot faster, right? So what it means is I can import my Tailwind stuff, and I actually, as opposed to putting a JavaScript file in that actual in the HTML, I'm going to pull it in the build server now. So this is where it gets a little strange in your sort of thinking, but just bear with me. So I'm going to pull in the npm packages, which pulls, that's all now in my node modules folder for Tailwind as well as for Alpine, okay? And a couple other Tailwind things that are in there. And then we're going to use Webpack to basically decide which features are being used right now and only output those. And we're going to build another JavaScript file and a CSS file that only has what we need, all right? So let's just see what that would look like. We're going to do npm. And we're going to do so if we do npm start, it doesn't do anything, right? It's just going to output everything. Npm run build. So this is going to do the whole thing. And now I've got this new build assets section in here. So again, still using npm run all, which is awesome. So I can have multiple commands. And my build command is going to say, hey, I'm going to run a clean first. So clean out all the files in my dist folder, and then run all the build : stars. So build syncs the CMS. That's cool. It's actually going to build my assets now. So it's going to call Webpack in production mode, right? And Webpack has an entrance file of, I don't remember. I think it's index.js somewhere. So I think it basically starts here. So it imports Alpine, and then we have we do this for Tailwind. So this is where what Zach was saying before. It's like Tailwind is kind of all or nothing. It's like I have to pull in all of Tailwind to get Tailwind. I can pull in a few things, and I think there's a way to take some stuff, but it kind of takes over your project a little bit, which I love because I'm not very good at other CSS things. So here we go. We have a static folder here too, in case we wanted to just pass things through. I don't have anything in there right now. All right. So if we actually look at the dist folder now, here it all is, and we have this new assets folder and these specially named files, okay? So what this did is it created this name so that I can regenerate this stuff, and I don't have to do any cache busting or anything like that as this builds. So I'm not sure that would be an issue, but it generates these unique files. Does this look like something I should be doing, Zach, or did I make a huge boo-boo here?
I mean, I think you're doing fine. I think it's probably important to mention that if you don't want to use Webpack, you can use Eleventy to create sort of aggregate asset files for you. So you could create like a CSS nunjux file that would just include CSS files from your node modules directory if you wanted, and you'd use permalink to sort of output that to a .css file in your output. So you can use Eleventy to generate any kind of file that you want. You could output a JSON file, or you can output a CSS file, you
Right.
can output a JavaScript file. So you can kind of work around Webpack if you want.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, what you just talked about there is actually what I did for my sitemap.xml. So I wanted my site to work and to be able to get indexed. So I did that. So if I actually just dump into my source folder here and in my my root of this. So this is the folder that gets parsed. Look, I've got sitemap.njk. So what you're saying is I could create NJKs here to do CSS, to do other JavaScript files. It's just taking, so I don't have to create HTML. I can create anything I want. I can create an XML file. I can create a JavaScript file. And actually what I'm doing here, this is a wacky one. So I wanted this to work. So Vercel has a way of doing redirects that's different from, oops, there's a text. That's different from how Netlify does it. So my Netlify redirects are right here, by the way. They're super simple. I basically origin to destination. I wanted that to work. And then Vercel has its own way, and I actually hacked it. This, you probably had no intention of this ever working, but I actually permalinked it with a .. to get it outside of the build folder. This is actually a little wacky because now this file needs to be checked in, so it gets a little weird too. So anyway, in this case, I'm actually outputting JSON. So you can do all kinds of wacky and crazy stuff if you really have the need to. So that's awesome. The other thing that I could do is do like an RSS file for my posts. If I want to do RSS, I could use Netlify to host my anything. So, or sorry, not Netlify to host it, but I could use Eleventy to build any kind of site that you want. So some really crazy, awesome stuff. What's really awesome about these though.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Use Eleventy to generate like API output too. So
right,
like,
yeah.
If your API doesn't necessarily have very high frequency updating files, then you could use Eleventy to sort of build those statically.
Cool. So the cool thing about this, however you do it, I'm using Webpack. Don't have to. I wish I had done it the other way. Now I kind of feel like, hey man, I got to do some work on that. But these are only 30. This CSS file is 33K, whereas the CSS file that I was downloading from the CDN, the tailwind CDN, was 3 megabytes. Okay, so that's a big deal. This is worthwhile work to do, even if you're just on a simple site. I think this is my JavaScript file is now 27K as opposed to I think 270 was the Alpine JS because I was only using just a little bit. So even if you have a small file, then it's really worthwhile to do that work. Okay. I wanted to do one other thing before we go. I'm a little bit over time and I apologize. I want to show the image plugin. Whatever. I want to show the image plugin and see how that works, even though I actually don't have it working because I don't think I did it quite right. So in order to pull in the image plugin, I just did an npm install of Eleventy image. And you can see underlined here, I got to do another npm install. This is a fairly new thing, right, Zach? So this came out after Eleventy.
Yep. We just started documenting and publicizing it a few weeks ago, but it's been in use in production on netlify.com for quite a few months.
Cool. So I basically pulled that in, and then what we do is we make some changes to our Eleventy.js, which we really haven't seen too much yet, but this is where we create basically an image shortcode. So this is copied and pasted from the instructions, but so what I did is I created this function that I copied from your awesome code. And what this does is it says, hey, we're only going to use widths of 300 and 600. We're going to use formats of, I say AVIF. I don't know what everyone says for this. I pronounce it AVIF and JPEG. These are the attributes that these images are going to have. And then we call image.generateHTML. So this is the magic right here, right? And this is an asynchronous call that does all the work.
Actually, the magic is that image function. This image.generateHTML.
Oh, this image function, yeah.
Yeah, that takes your metadata. So the image constructor there, that is what creates the image files for you.
Right. Okay. So this is the asynchronous thing that does all the work here. And then we're now going to use this short code, and we're going to basically declare it to work in nunjucts. And if we had liquid, there'd be a similar declaration and a couple of other ones. But since we're using nunjucts, we're going to say Eleventy config add nunjucts async shortcode. We're going to call this shortcode image, We could have a bunch of different image shortcodes if we had different things that we wanted them to do. We could also pass more parameters in here. I noticed there were some other ones where like we passed the widths in that we could do. So shortcodes are kind of like functions in your templates that can do stuff. And then I went and used it in a couple places. I think the most obvious place would be, let's go through here and I find my, oh geez, I'm lost in my own code. Includes, modules. In my post details, I know this one has a big image. We had this one here where we had a picture tag. So let's replace that. I'm gonna now have my image. I'm gonna pass in the whole URL. So this is like the highest quality of that image. Now this is an image that's already on a CDN. So I think what happens is this actually gets downloaded locally, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, it's going to download it locally, and then we also use, this is my alt tag, and then I don't remember what the third parameter is for that guy.
Let's just go look. Attribute that gets used with picture.
Cool. All right. So in theory, this should now work. So I'm going to go npm. Does it now? It doesn't care whether I'm doing this in like development mode or production mode or anything like that. It just runs all the time, right? If I wanted to have that, I could do that. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we can see it's caching and downloading my files here. So in theory, it's going to be working. So let's take a quick peek at what it did. It downloaded them. We've got some AVIFs. We've got some JPEGs. So it's doing these and creating nice small versions of them for me. Because I've got actually a couple other places where I use this. This is where I'm probably going to be you're going to be disappointed in me, because I think I didn't do a great job at this. So let's look at 8080, I think it is. So here's the home page, and it doesn't output anything. So this is the disappointing part of this whole demo, where it doesn't output any code whatsoever. It has a very nice use of white space. Yeah, let's look at our blog listing here for a second. So post listing, I did the same thing. I actually included both in here, and I think it's got something to do with how I'm including this template maybe as part of those dynamic includes. I'm not sure. Do I have to do something to say that this is asynchronous maybe when it gets loaded? I'm not sure.
No, you shouldn't have to do that as long as you declare your nunjux shortcode to be asynchronous in your config file. And I think that you had done that.
Yeah, so I've got the image, the post, and I know it downloaded them. It's got my labels. I don't even know if I used this third parameter at all. I don't remember. Let's look. No, I don't even, oh, sizes, I've got this sizes. So that just gets passed through. So unless I've got a problem in that sizes, it doesn't seem to be returning anything. So how would I debug this?
You could just throw a console log right in there and it should output in Node.
Like this guy. So do let, retval. I don't know what it's supposed to actually, it actually returns me the HTML, right?
Yeah, that will. Yeah. I don't think you want async on there.
Oh, sorry. This one, I don't want to wait this one, right? Okay, yeah. Console.log. So if anyone is wondering if this is a bad thing to do, it's not a bad thing to do. Of course, just do it. It's going to be good. Oh yeah, so it looks like it actually is outputting the right stuff. So that's something to look at the other day, but you can see that it actually is pointing to the right spots and doing what I think it should be doing. So that looks awesome. And I probably just have something else going on somewhere else in my own templates. But yeah, there we go. I want to have some time for questions, and I'm just so glad that Zach was here. Like as I was going through the code, to just say, "Hey, how about that?" or "Tell me about your opinions on this." So this has been great, Zach. Is there anything else that you wanted to say to the folks today that just sort of off the top of your head, or just shout outs to folks at home, anything like that?
I mean, I did want to make one small point about the thing that I just really love about the Jamstack sort of idea is that we can sort of automate things in our build, sort of take away things that need to be generated on the client browser. That's my favorite part about Jamstack. So sort of increasing your build times, sure, to do more, to do fancier things, but you're also saving every end user that comes to your website performance cost and performance time. So it really allows us to automate making the fastest websites that we can, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I have to say thank you for the work that you're doing, man. It's really, first of all, thank you for showing up today, but also for creating something like Eleventy, putting yourself out there, using it in things that are important to you, and taking your skills. Like I think it's awesome to hear that you're someone who has really studied computer science and you've studied like your craft, you say, oh, I'd love to be a better designer. It's like, yeah, I think you took the thing that you're good at and have made it like something that's people like me need to see. Like, we need this on the internet, out on the interwebs to help us do our job better. I'm good with things like pulling in data and content and understanding, when I'm not very good at caching, but to be able to have a tool like Eleventy really helps folks. Like, I think the folks in the audience, as well as, folks like me that are like, I need a tool to help me. And then this is the tool that helps us. So that's great.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's a really nice and kind thing to say. I would say that it just in terms of like career building, I feel like it's very important to wait for your moment. And I really just felt like when I started building Eleventy that it was the thing that I was going to be good at. And sometimes you feel that and it doesn't pay off, but sometimes it does. So I would say that just go for it. If you have an idea like this and you want to implement something, and yeah, just go for it. See what happens.
Brilliant. Yeah, there was a couple questions. One from Meg. What do you recommend for styling frameworks to use with Eleventy?
I mean, I'm kind of a like do-it-myself, DIY CSS kind of person. So I'm more like a fan of controlling all the code that goes into my project. I will say that I've had some really good experience with Andy Bell's CSS reset. I feel like it's very well maintained. So if you look up Andy Bell's CSS reset, you can find sort of like a reset CSS that you can use in your projects to give you a good starting point. I feel like that's a really good project that I would vouch for. But in terms of just like, I don't know, front end projects, the reason Eleventy kind of exists is that in its current form is that I like to I sort of like to control the whole everything that comes out of the website. So everything that gets delivered to the client. So yeah, I kind of like having as much control over what gets output as possible.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you spending the time. There are a few more questions, but we're kind of out of time here, and I don't want to take too much time. Definitely join if you have more questions. There's a Jamstack Slack. Join that, but there's also the Slack channel for Agility. Throw your questions on there, and then I'll reach out after that for any of these for sure. Are there any 0 to 11 Eleventy courses out there? I would say the eleventy.dev website is awesome, but also follow Zach on Twitter and follow Eleventy on Twitter. That's probably your best bet. You're going to see lots of stuff come out there, and you'll see cool projects like the lights that light up. I know that was very inspiring for me on a cold day. And then I'm kind of on, like, we call it tech Twitter. Just start following people, and that's a really positive community. I think the Jamstack community has to me anyway, has been super positive as a noob coming in and like, I don't know anything what I'm doing. What is Node again? A couple of years ago, and people will help you learn, and there are a lot of learning developers out there who have a lot of experience. So that's all good.
Yeah, if you build something with Eleventy, definitely CC the Eleventy Twitter account, and I'll give you a retweet. No problem.
Brilliant. Appreciate that. Appreciate all you do. And thanks for joining us, folks in the audience. And take her easy. Have a good one. Bye now.
Thanks for having me.